Daniel Brooks froze in the middle of the busy Manhattan street, his heart stopping as he stared at the delicate gold locket hanging around the neck of a homeless little girl in a torn red dress. The same irreplaceable antique locket he'd placed in his daughter's tiny hands 3 years ago before her coffin was lowered into the ground. The child begging for spare change outside the coffee shop had his late daughter Isabella's exact eyes, her same sweet smile, and most impossibly, the family heirloom that was supposed to be buried 6 feet underground in Woodlawn Cemetery. "That's not possible," Daniel whispered, kneeling down to stare at the intricate rose pattern he'd memorized during countless bedtime stories, while the little girl who looked exactly like Isabella would have looked at age 6 gazed back at him with the innocent hope of a child who'd learned to trust strangers for survival. What Daniel didn't know was that his dead daughter had been living on the streets for 3 years, while his ex-wife Monica collected life insurance payments on a child who was very much alive, and that the homeless girl wearing his buried treasure was about to reveal that his greatest tragedy had actually been his greatest betrayal. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comment where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get into the story. 3 years earlier, Daniel Brooks had been living the American dream in its most Instagram-perfect form. At 35, he was the founder and CEO of Brooks Technologies, a software company that had revolutionized financial planning apps and made him worth roughly $50 million by his 32nd birthday. He lived in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park with his beautiful wife Monica and their precocious 3-year-old daughter Isabella, who had inherited Daniel's quick mind and Monica's striking features. "Daddy, will you read me the locket story again?" Isabella had asked during what would be their final bedtime routine together, holding the antique gold pendant that had become her favorite piece of jewelry despite being far too valuable for a toddler to wear regularly. "Of course, Princess," Daniel had said, settling into the rocking chair beside Isabella's bed while she curled up under her princess-themed comforter. "Once upon a time, your great-great-grandmother Rose was a little girl who had to leave her family in Ireland to come to America all by herself." "Why did she have to leave?" Isabella had asked, though she'd heard the story dozens of times and knew every detail by heart. "Because her family was very poor, and they wanted her to have a better life in a new country," Daniel had explained, opening the locket to show Isabella the tiny photographs of ancestors she'd never met. "Rose's mother gave her this locket before she got on the big ship, and she said that as long as Rose wore it, she would never be alone because her family's love would always be with her. And Rose gave it to her daughter, and she gave it to her daughter, and she gave it to Mommy, and Mommy will give it to me when I'm big." Isabella had recited with the precision of a child who took family traditions seriously. "That's right, baby girl," Daniel had confirmed, kissing Isabella's forehead while she drifted off to sleep clutching the locket that represented 5 generations of Brooks women who'd survived hardship through the strength of family love. Have you ever had a perfect life that was secretly built on lies you were too trusting to recognize? What happens when the person you trust most uses your love as a weapon against your own happiness? The car accident that had supposedly killed Isabella had happened on a rainy Thursday evening in October, while Monica was driving to pick up Isabella from her dance class at the community center. Daniel had been stuck in a board meeting when Monica had called, sobbing hysterically about being rear-ended by a drunk driver, and rushed to the hospital with Isabella in critical condition. "Daniel, you need to get here immediately," Monica had cried into the phone, her voice carrying the kind of panic that made Daniel's blood turn cold. "Isabella, she's hurt very badly. The doctors don't know if she's going to make it." Daniel had left his meeting immediately, racing through Manhattan traffic while his heart hammered with terror about losing the most precious person in his world. He'd arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital to find Monica in the emergency room waiting area, her clothes torn and bloodied, her face streaked with tears that looked completely genuine. "How is she?" Daniel had demanded, barely able to form words through his panic. "She's in surgery," Monica had said, collapsing into Daniel's arms with the kind of devastated sobbing that suggested she was barely holding herself together. "Daniel," the impact threw her from her car seat. "The doctors said there's massive internal bleeding and possible brain trauma. But she's going to be okay?" Daniel had asked desperately, needing Monica to promise him that their daughter would survive. "I don't know," Monica had whispered. "Daniel, they said we should prepare for the worst." The next 8 hours had been the longest of Daniel's life, spent pacing hospital corridors while surgeons worked to save Isabella's life, and Monica sat in the waiting room looking like a woman whose entire world was falling apart. When Dr. Patricia Reeves had finally emerged from the operating room at 3 a.m., her expression had told Daniel everything he'd been afraid to hear. "Mr. Brooks, Mrs. Brooks, I'm very sorry," Dr. Reeves had said with the gentle authority of someone who delivered tragic news to too many families. "We did everything we could, but Isabella's injuries were too severe. She died during surgery." Daniel's world had ended in that moment, collapsing around him in ways that made breathing feel impossible, and standing upright seem like more effort than his body could manage. He'd fallen to his knees in the hospital corridor, sobbing with the kind of broken-hearted anguish that comes from losing a child who was supposed to outlive you by decades. "Can we see her?" Monica had asked through her own tears. "Of course," Dr. Reeves had said gently. "Take all the time you need." The body they'd shown Daniel had been small and still, covered in bandages that made identification difficult. But the golden locket around the child's neck had been unmistakably Isabella's. Daniel had spent an hour sitting beside what he believed was his daughter's body, whispering promises about love that transcended death, while Monica had sobbed in the chair beside him. "She looks peaceful," Monica had said, her voice barely audible through her tears. "She looks like she's sleeping," Daniel had agreed, kissing his fingers and touching them to the child's forehead in a final gesture of fatherly love. The funeral had been held 4 days later, with over 300 people attending to pay their respects to a little girl who'd been taken too young and parents who were struggling to survive the worst loss imaginable. Daniel had delivered a eulogy that focused on Isabella's joy, her intelligence, her capacity for love, and her dreams of becoming a veterinarian who would help sick animals feel better. Isabella believed that love was the most powerful force in the universe, Daniel had said, looking out at the crowd of friends, family members, and business associates who'd come to mourn with them. She believed that caring about others was more important than caring about yourself, and she believed that every day was a chance to make someone else happy. Monica had been inconsolable during the service, requiring support from her sister and sedation from the family doctor to get through the ceremony. Her grief had seemed so authentic, so devastating, that Daniel had felt guilty about his own moments of numbness when the pain became too overwhelming to process. The burial had been private, with only Daniel, Monica, and their immediate families present as Isabella's small white coffin was lowered into the ground at Woodlawn Cemetery. Daniel had placed a dozen pink roses on the grave, Isabella's favorite flowers, while Monica had thrown handfuls of dirt with trembling hands. "Goodbye, baby girl," Daniel had whispered, his voice breaking as he'd watched his daughter disappear beneath the earth. "Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky." For 3 years following Isabella's death, Daniel had thrown himself into work as a way of avoiding the emptiness that had taken over his penthouse apartment. The marriage had crumbled under the weight of shared grief, with Monica eventually moving out and filing for divorce based on irreconcilable differences that were really just two people who couldn't look at each other without remembering what they'd lost. "Daniel, we can't keep living in this mausoleum," Monica had said during one of their final conversations as a married couple, standing in Isabella's bedroom, which Daniel had kept exactly as it was the day she'd died. "Being here just makes the pain worse." "Being anywhere makes the pain worse," Daniel had replied honestly. "Monica, I don't know how to exist in a world without Isabella. Maybe that's why we should try to exist without each other," Monica had said, with what Daniel had interpreted as shared recognition that their marriage was another casualty of the accident that had taken their daughter. The divorce had been finalized 18 months after Isabella's death, with Monica receiving a substantial settlement that included half of Daniel's liquid assets and a monthly alimony payment of $25,000. She'd moved to Los Angeles, claiming she needed a fresh start somewhere that didn't remind her constantly of the daughter they'd lost. "I hope you find peace," Daniel had told Monica on the day she'd moved out of their apartment. "I hope we both do," she'd replied, embracing him with what had felt like genuine affection despite their decision to end their marriage. Daniel had continued visiting Isabella's grave every Sunday for 3 years, bringing fresh flowers and spending hours talking to his daughter about his work, his struggles with loneliness, and his certainty that she was watching over him from wherever little girls went when they died too young. "Daddy's doing okay, Princess," he'd said during his most recent visit, kneeling beside the pink granite headstone that read, "Isabella Rose Brooks, beloved daughter, taken too soon. Business is good, and I'm trying to take better care of myself like you always told me to do." It was during his walk home from the cemetery that Sunday afternoon that Daniel's carefully constructed world of grief and acceptance had been shattered by the sight of a homeless little girl wearing the locket he'd buried with his daughter 3 years earlier. The child was sitting outside a Starbucks on 5th Avenue, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Please help. I'm hungry and I have nowhere to sleep." She was maybe 6 years old, wearing a torn red dress that had probably been beautiful once, with her hair in neat braids that suggested someone was taking care of her despite her circumstances. But it was the locket around her neck that made Daniel's heart stop. The intricate rose pattern, the antique gold setting, the delicate chain that had belonged to 5 generations of Brooks women. There was no question that this was the same piece of jewelry he'd placed around Isabella's neck before her burial. "Excuse me," Daniel had said, kneeling down to the child's eye level while his hands shook with recognition and impossible hope. "Sweetheart, where did you get that necklace?" The little girl had looked up at Daniel with eyes that were unmistakably familiar. The same shade of brown as Isabella's, the same long lashes, the same intelligent expression that suggested she was older than her years. "A lady gave it to me," she'd said in a voice that made Daniel's chest tighten with recognition. "She said it would keep me safe." "What lady?" Daniel had asked, his voice barely controlled as he'd stared at a face that looked exactly like Isabella would have looked at age 6. "I don't remember her name," the child had said honestly. "But she told me this necklace was very special and that I should never take it off." Daniel had reached out with trembling fingers to touch the locket, confirming what his heart had already known. This was the same piece of jewelry he buried, worn by a child who looked exactly like his supposedly dead daughter. "Sweetheart," Daniel had said carefully, "what's your name?" "Shakita," the little girl had replied. "But sometimes people call me other things." "Shakita, how old are you?" "I think I'm 6, she'd said with the uncertainty of a child who'd been without stable adult guidance for a significant period. "But I'm not really sure." As Daniel had knelt on the sidewalk looking into eyes that belonged to the daughter he'd buried 3 years ago, he'd begun to understand that his greatest tragedy had actually been his greatest betrayal, and that the wife he'd trusted with his grief had stolen far more than just his money when she'd walked away from their marriage. The DNA test results that Daniel had ordered through a private laboratory came back exactly 72 hours after his encounter with Shakita on 5th Avenue, and the numbers on the page confirmed what his heart had known the moment he'd seen his family's locket around her neck. The homeless child begging for food was his daughter Isabella, aged by 3 years of surviving on the streets, but unmistakably the baby girl he'd sung to sleep every night for the first 3 years of her life. The probability of paternity is 99.97%, Dr. Sarah Kim, the geneticist who'd processed the test, explained to Daniel over the phone. "Mr. Brooks, this child is definitely your biological daughter." Daniel sat in his penthouse office staring at the legal document that proved Isabella was alive while his mind raced with the implications of what Monica had done to their family. For 3 years, he'd been paying life insurance benefits on a child who was living on the streets. For 3 years, he'd been grieving a daughter who had been abandoned to foster care or worse. For 3 years, his ex-wife had been collecting money from the tragedy she'd orchestrated. "Dr. Kim, is there any possibility that this test is wrong?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. With a 99.97% probability, the margin of error is essentially non-existent, Dr. Kim confirmed. "Mr. Brooks, that little girl is your daughter. The question now is how she ended up separated from your family. Have you ever discovered that your entire life has been built on lies so elaborate that you can't trust any memory or assumption you've held sacred? What do you do when the person you grieved for is alive, but the person you trusted is dead to you?" The next step had been hiring the best private investigator money could buy. Marcus Williams was a former FBI agent who specialized in missing persons cases and insurance fraud, and his reputation for uncovering truth in impossible situations had made him worth his $500 per hour fee. "Mr. Brooks, I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that what we discover will be devastating," Marcus had warned during their initial meeting. "If your daughter has been alive for 3 years while you've been told she was dead, then someone orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy that involved faking a child's death and abandoning her to the system." "I need to know the truth," Daniel had said firmly. "Marcus, I don't care how bad it is or who it implicates. I need to understand what happened to Isabella and how she ended up living on the streets." "Where is the child now?" Marcus had asked. "Safe," Daniel had replied. "I've placed her in temporary care with a family friend who specializes in fostering traumatized children. Isabella, she still calls herself Shakita, doesn't remember me or her life before the accident. Marcus, she's been through trauma that's affected her memory and her ability to trust adults. That's consistent with a child who's been in the foster system or worse," Marcus had said grimly. "Mr. Brooks, children who survive abandonment and abuse often develop amnesia as a protective mechanism. Isabella may not remember her early life because those memories are connected to the trauma of losing her family." The investigation had taken Marcus 6 weeks to complete, and the file he delivered to Daniel contained evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and child abandonment that was so comprehensive it read like a crime thriller novel. "Your ex-wife Monica never lost a child in a car accident," Marcus had said, spreading photographs, documents, and witness statements across Daniel's conference table. "What she lost was her patience with motherhood and her willingness to share your attention with a 3-year-old. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, though he was beginning to suspect that the truth would be even worse than he'd imagined. "I mean that Monica staged Isabella's death as part of an elaborate plan to collect life insurance money while getting rid of a child she viewed as an obstacle to her lifestyle," Marcus explained, showing Daniel photographs of Monica taken at expensive resorts during the months immediately following Isabella's supposed death. "She was grieving," Daniel protested weakly. "She was celebrating," Marcus corrected, showing Daniel credit card receipts that proved Monica had been living in luxury while collecting $2 million in life insurance payments on a child who was being processed through the foster care system under a false identity. The evidence was overwhelming and sickening. Medical records showing that the child who died in surgery was not Isabella, but another little girl who'd been in the accident. Falsified death certificates that had been created through bribery of corrupt hospital staff. Foster care placement documents showing that Isabella had been given to the system under the name Shakita Johnson, with fabricated background information that made it impossible for anyone to trace her real identity. How is this possible? Daniel asked, staring at evidence that proved his wife had essentially sold their daughter to cover up a crime. Monica had help, Marcus explained. Your ex-wife was involved with Dr. Patricia Reeves, the surgeon who pronounced Isabella dead. They'd been having an affair for over a year before the accident, and they worked together to fake Isabella's death while placing the real Isabella into foster care under an assumed identity. Dr. Reeves was Monica's lover? Daniel asked in horror. Dr. Reeves was Monica's co-conspirator, Marcus confirmed. The plan was to collect the life insurance money, split it between them, and start a new life together in California while you grieved a child who was actually being shuffled through the foster system. The photographs Marcus showed Daniel were devastating evidence of betrayal that went far deeper than adultery. Monica and Dr. Reeves had been photographed together at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, and vacation destinations that had been funded by Isabella's supposed death. What happened to Isabella after she was placed in foster care? Daniel asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. She was moved between 7 different foster homes over 3 years, Marcus said grimly. Some of the placements were legitimate attempts to provide care for a traumatized child. Others were less appropriate. What do you mean by less appropriate? I mean that Isabella was placed with families who were more interested in the monthly stipend than in providing actual care, Marcus said carefully. Mr. Brooks, your daughter has been neglected, underfed, and possibly abused by people who were supposed to protect her. Daniel felt rage building in his chest as he realized that his daughter had been suffering for 3 years, while Monica had been living in luxury funded by Isabella's fake death. How did Isabella end up on the streets? Daniel asked. She ran away from her last foster placement 6 months ago, Marcus explained. The family she was living with had been using the foster children as unpaid labor while pocketing the care money. Isabella escaped and has been surviving on her own since then. A 6-year-old child has been homeless for 6 months. Daniel asked incredulously. A 6-year-old child has been protecting herself for 6 months, Marcus corrected. Mr. Brooks, your daughter is remarkably resilient, but she's also deeply traumatized by 3 years of abandonment and neglect. The final piece of evidence Marcus presented was the most damning. Recorded phone conversations between Monica and Dr. Reeves discussing their plan to eliminate Isabella from Daniel's life. Monica specifically said that she wanted to get rid of the kid because Isabella was interfering with her social life and her access to your money, Marcus explained, playing audio recordings that made Daniel feel sick to his stomach. She's so clingy and demanding, Monica's voice said on the recording. Patricia, I can't go anywhere or do anything without Daniel obsessing over that child. If something happened to Isabella, Daniel and I could have the kind of marriage I actually want. Accidents happen, Dr. Reeves had replied. Monica, if you're serious about this, I know people who can arrange situations that look completely natural. How much would it cost? Monica had asked. For you? Nothing, Dr. Reeves had said. I'll handle the medical side, you handle the emotional performance, and we'll split the insurance money. Daniel had to stop the recording because hearing his wife plan their daughter's elimination was more painful than he could process. There's more, Marcus said gently. Mr. Brooks, Monica didn't just fake Isabella's death. She's been collecting life insurance payments for 3 years while also receiving alimony from you. She's made over $4 million from Isabella's supposed death. Where is Monica now? Daniel asked, his voice carrying the kind of cold fury that suggested he was capable of violence. "Living in Beverly Hills with Dr. Reeves," Marcus replied. "They've been married for 8 months, and they're using your daughter's life insurance money to fund a luxury lifestyle that includes a $3 million house, luxury cars, and frequent international travel." Daniel stared at the photographs of Monica and Dr. Reeves living in luxury while Isabella had been surviving on the streets, and felt something break inside his chest that might never heal properly. "I want them arrested," Daniel said firmly. "Marcus, I want Monica and Dr. Reeves prosecuted for fraud, conspiracy, child abandonment, and whatever other charges apply to people who fake a child's death and steal insurance money. That's going to require coordination with law enforcement agencies in multiple states," Marcus warned. "Mr. Brooks, pursuing criminal charges will mean extensive media attention and a very public trial that will expose everything Isabella has been through. Isabella deserves justice," Daniel said without hesitation. "And other children deserve protection from people who would do this to their own families." The arrest warrants were issued 6 days later, with Monica and Dr. Reeves being taken into custody at their Beverly Hills home while they were hosting a dinner party funded by Isabella's supposed death. The media coverage was immediate and intense, with headlines like "Mother Fakes Daughter's Death for Insurance Money" and "Millionaire's ex-wife Arrested in Elaborate Child Abandonment Scheme." But Daniel's focus wasn't on the media circus or the criminal proceedings. It was on the little girl who sat in his penthouse playroom, slowly beginning to remember fragments of her life before Monica had stolen her from the only father who'd ever loved her unconditionally. "Isabella," Daniel said gently, sitting across from his daughter while she played with toys he'd bought to replace everything she'd lost during 3 years of foster care. "Do you remember anything about living here before?" "Sometimes I dream about a man who sang songs," Isabella said quietly, not making eye contact but clearly trying to access memories that had been buried under trauma. "He had a nice voice and he smelled like the soap that makes you feel clean." "What kind of songs did he sing?" Daniel asked, his heart racing with hope. "Songs about princesses and dragons and magic gardens," Isabella replied, unconsciously describing the bedtime stories Daniel had created specifically for her when she was a toddler. "Isabella, do you remember what the man looked like?" She looked up at Daniel directly for the first time since he'd brought her home, studying his face with the kind of careful attention that suggested she was comparing his features to buried memories. "He looked like you," she said simply. "But he was younger and he smiled more." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face as he realized that Isabella was beginning to remember their relationship despite 3 years of trauma designed to erase her identity. "Isabella, I am the man who sang to you," Daniel said gently. "I'm your daddy, and I've been looking for you every day since you were taken away from me." "The bad lady said you didn't want me anymore," Isabella said with devastating honesty. "She said you gave me away because I was too much trouble." "That was a lie," Daniel said firmly, kneeling down to look Isabella in the eye. "Isabella, you were never trouble. You were the most precious thing in my entire world, and losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But you found me again," Isabella observed with 6-year-old logic. "Yes, princess," Daniel confirmed, using his pet name for her and watching as recognition flickered in her expression. "I found you again, and I'm never going to let anyone take you away from me." "Promise?" Isabella asked with the desperate hope of a child who'd learned that adult promises were often broken. "I promise with my whole heart," Daniel said, opening his arms and feeling overwhelmed with gratitude when Isabella moved into his embrace for the first time in 3 years. "Daddy," Isabella whispered against his chest, the word carrying 3 years of separation, trauma, and the miraculous recognition that love really could survive anything. "Yes, baby girl," Daniel replied, holding his daughter and understanding that finding her was only the beginning of their journey back to each other. Because healing from 3 years of abandonment and abuse would require more than just reunion. It would require helping Isabella remember who she was before Monica had stolen her identity, while building new trust between a father and daughter who'd both been damaged by the cruelest betrayal imaginable. But as Daniel held Isabella in his arms for the first time since her supposed funeral, he knew that no amount of healing would be too difficult if it meant giving his daughter the life she'd been denied for 3 years. The media circus that erupted around Isabella's miraculous return from the dead became a double-edged sword that brought justice closer, while making their healing journey infinitely more complicated. Within 48 hours of Monica's arrest, the story had gone viral with hashtags like #FakeDeath and #MiracleReunion trending across social media platforms, while reporters camped outside Daniel's building hoping to capture photos of the ghost child who'd risen from her own grave. "Daddy, why are there so many people with cameras downstairs?" Isabella asked during their 3rd morning together, peering through the penthouse windows at the crowd of journalists who'd been documenting their every movement. "Because people are interested in our story," Daniel explained gently, though he was struggling to balance Isabella's need for privacy with the public's fascination with their family's tragedy and reunion. "What story?" Isabella asked with 6-year-old curiosity. Daniel had been dreading this conversation, knowing that Isabella would eventually need to understand the full scope of what Monica had done to their family. But explaining insurance fraud, fake death certificates, and maternal abandonment to a traumatized child required more wisdom than Daniel possessed. "Have you ever tried to explain ultimate betrayal to someone who's supposed to trust that parents protect their children? What do you do when the truth is too painful for a child, but lies are too dangerous for healing?" "Isabella, do you remember Monica?" Daniel asked carefully, settling into the chair beside his daughter while she colored pictures of families that always included a father and daughter, but never included a mother. "The bad lady who said you didn't want me," Isabella replied without looking up from her artwork. "Monica was. She was my wife and your mother when you were very little," Daniel said, watching Isabella's face for signs of recognition or distress. "She wasn't my mother," Isabella said with surprising firmness. "Mothers take care of their children. The bad lady gave me away." "You're right," Daniel agreed, marveling at his daughter's intuitive understanding of what constituted real maternal love. "Isabella, Monica made very bad choices that hurt both of us. She told me that you had died in a car accident, and she told other people that I didn't want you anymore. But those were lies," Isabella observed. "Yes, sweetheart, those were lies," Daniel confirmed. "And now Monica is in trouble with the police because lying about those things is against the law." Isabella considered this information while adding purple flowers to her family drawing, clearly processing concepts that were too adult for her years, but necessary for her understanding of why their family had been separated. "Will Monica come back?" Isabella asked, the question carrying obvious fear about losing the safety she'd just rediscovered. "No, baby girl," Daniel said firmly. "Monica will never be able to hurt you again. I promise." The legal proceedings that would determine Monica's fate had become a media spectacle that attracted national attention to issues of insurance fraud, corrupt medical professionals, and the failures of the foster care system that had allowed Isabella to disappear into bureaucratic anonymity for 3 years. "Mr. Brooks, the prosecution is confident that we can secure convictions against both Monica and Dr. Reeves," said Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Walsh during one of their preparation meetings. "The evidence of conspiracy is overwhelming, and the financial records clearly show that they profited from Isabella's supposed death." "What kind of sentences are we looking at?" Daniel asked. "For Monica, we're pursuing charges of insurance fraud, child abandonment, filing false police reports, and conspiracy, Attorney Walsh explained. If convicted on all counts, she could face 15 to 20 years in federal prison. And Dr. Reeves? Medical fraud, conspiracy, falsifying death certificates, and aiding child abandonment, Attorney Walsh said. As a licensed physician who violated her oath to do no harm, Dr. Reeves could face even longer sentences than Monica. But the legal victory Daniel wanted most was something that couldn't be achieved through criminal prosecution. He wanted Isabella's identity officially restored, and the 3 years of trauma she'd endured acknowledged by the systems that had failed to protect her. Ms. Walsh, what about Isabella's legal status? Daniel asked. She's been in the foster care system under a false identity for 3 years. How do we correct her official records? That's more complicated, Attorney Walsh admitted. Isabella will need to be officially declared alive, her death certificate will need to be voided, and her foster care records will need to be sealed to protect her privacy. The process could take months. And in the meantime, you continue rebuilding your relationship with a daughter who's been through trauma that most adults couldn't survive, Attorney Walsh said gently. Mr. Brooks, Isabella's legal status is important, but her emotional recovery is more important. The challenge of Isabella's emotional recovery became apparent during their first family therapy session with Dr. Rachel Kim, a child psychologist who specialized in reunion therapy for families separated by trauma. Isabella, can you tell me about your favorite memories from before you lived with your daddy again? Dr. Kim asked during their initial session. I don't remember much from before, Isabella said quietly, focusing on the toy dollhouse that Dr. Kim used to help children express feelings they couldn't articulate verbally. Sometimes I dream about nice things, but I'm not sure if they really happened or if I made them up. What kind of nice things do you dream about? Dr. Kim asked gently. A man who made pancakes shaped like animals, Isabella said, unconsciously describing Daniel's Saturday morning tradition. And a room with pink walls and a bed that was shaped like a castle. Daniel felt his chest tighten as he realized Isabella was remembering fragments of their life together, despite 3 years of trauma designed to erase those connections. Isabella, those dreams sound very real, Dr. Kim said encouragingly. Sometimes our minds remember important things even when we think we've forgotten them. Dr. Kim, is it normal for Isabella to have such fragmented memories? Daniel asked. It's very normal, Dr. Kim assured him. Daniel, Isabella experienced what we call ambiguous loss. She lost her family and her identity simultaneously, which created trauma that her developing brain protected her from by suppressing painful memories. Will she eventually remember everything? Some memories will return naturally as Isabella feels safer and more secure, Dr. Kim explained. Others may never return, and that's okay too. The goal isn't to recover every lost memory. It's to help Isabella integrate her past experiences with her current reality in ways that allow her to trust that she's safe now. The integration process proved more challenging than Daniel had anticipated. Isabella had developed survival instincts during her 3 years in foster care that made it difficult for her to accept that she no longer needed to protect herself from the adults who were supposed to care for her. Isabella, you don't need to hide food in your bedroom, Daniel said gently, discovering crackers and fruit hidden under her mattress. There's always going to be plenty of food available whenever you're hungry. But what if there isn't? Isabella asked with the practical concern of a child who'd learned that adults' promises about basic needs weren't always reliable. Then we'll go to the store and buy more food, Daniel said simply. Isabella, I have enough money to make sure you never go hungry again. What if the money runs out? It won't run out, Daniel assured her, though he understood that Isabella's questions came from real experiences of scarcity rather than hypothetical fears. What if you decide you don't want me anymore? Isabella asked, voicing the deepest fear that had been shaped by 3 years of being moved between homes whenever adults decided she was too much trouble. "Isabella, look at me," Daniel said, kneeling down to make eye contact with his daughter. "I will never, ever decide that I don't want you. You are my daughter, and nothing in the entire world could make me stop loving you. Even if I'm bad? You could never be bad enough for me to stop loving you," Daniel said firmly. "Isabella, my love for you doesn't depend on your behavior. It depends on the fact that you're my daughter, and that will never change." The breakthrough in their relationship came 6 weeks after their reunion, during a thunderstorm that triggered one of Isabella's nightmares about being abandoned in the rain. Daniel found her huddled in her closet, crying and calling for the man who sang songs, while thunder crashed outside their windows. "Isabella, it's okay," Daniel said softly, approaching her hiding place without trying to force her to come out. "You're safe, and I'm here with you." "I dreamed that the bad lady came back," Isabella sobbed. "She said you were tired of taking care of me, and that I had to go away again." "That's never going to happen," Daniel said, settling down outside the closet so Isabella could see him while still feeling protected by her hiding place. "Isabella, would you like me to sing you one of our songs? You remember our songs?" Isabella asked with surprise. "I remember every song we ever sang together," Daniel said, beginning the lullaby that had been their nightly tradition when Isabella was a toddler. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." Isabella's crying gradually stopped as Daniel sang, and by the third verse, she was singing along with words she'd remembered despite 3 years of separation. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky, they sang together, their voices harmonizing in ways that proved some bonds really were stronger than trauma. "Daddy," Isabella said when the song ended, using the title naturally for the first time since their reunion, "will you sing the princess song too?" "Of course, baby girl," Daniel said, launching into the elaborate ballad about a brave princess who rescued dragons instead of being rescued by princes. A song he'd written specifically for Isabella when she was 2 years old and had declared that princesses should be the heroes of their own stories. By the time the thunderstorm had passed, Isabella was sleeping peacefully in Daniel's arms, and both of them understood that they'd crossed a threshold in their healing journey that marked the difference between being strangers sharing DNA and being a father and daughter who'd chosen to love each other through impossible circumstances. But their private healing was about to be tested by the most public trial of the decade, as Monica and Dr. Reeves faced justice for crimes that had captured the nation's attention and made Isabella's story a symbol of resilience, betrayal, and the power of love to survive even the most elaborate deceptions. The trial of Monica Brooks and Dr. Patricia Reeves began on a cold Tuesday morning in February, exactly 9 months after Daniel had discovered Isabella begging on Fifth Avenue. The courthouse was surrounded by media trucks, protesters holding signs about child protection, and curious onlookers who'd been following the story since Monica's arrest had made national headlines. "Daddy, do I have to go to the scary place?" Isabella asked as they prepared for what would be the most difficult day of the legal proceedings. The day when Isabella would testify about her experiences in foster care and identify Monica as the woman who'd abandoned her. "Only if you feel brave enough," Daniel said gently, though he knew that Isabella's testimony would be crucial for securing convictions against the people who'd stolen 3 years of her childhood. "Isabella, you can stop anytime you feel scared, and I'll be sitting right behind you the whole time." "Will the bad lady be there?" Isabella asked, referring to Monica with the same clinical detachment she used for all discussions of her traumatic experiences. "Yes, sweetheart, but she can't hurt you anymore," Daniel assured her. "Isabella, Monica is the one who's in trouble now, not you." The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and child welfare advocates who'd made Isabella's case a rallying point for reform of the systems that had allowed a living child to be buried under bureaucratic anonymity for 3 years. But Isabella's attention was focused entirely on Daniel, who'd arranged to sit in the front row where she could see him throughout her testimony. "Please state your name for the record," said Judge Margaret Chin, speaking in the gentle tone she reserved for child witnesses. "My name is Isabella Rose Brooks," Isabella said clearly, using her full legal name for the first time since her identity had been restored. "I'm 6 years old, and I live with my daddy." "Isabella, do you remember living with your daddy when you were younger?" asked Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh. "I remember some things," Isabella replied honestly. "I remember pancakes shaped like animals and songs about princesses and a room with pink walls. Do you remember anyone else who lived with you and your daddy?" Isabella's eyes moved to Monica, who sat at the defendant's table wearing expensive clothes and an expression of defiant indifference that suggested she felt no remorse for the pain she'd caused. "The bad lady lived with us," Isabella said matter-of-factly, "but she didn't like me very much. Can you point to the bad lady in the courtroom today?" Isabella pointed directly at Monica without hesitation, her small finger unwavering as she identified the woman who'd orchestrated her abandonment. "That's her," Isabella said with certainty. "That's the lady who told me that Daddy didn't want me anymore." Monica's facade of indifference cracked slightly at Isabella's words, though whether from guilt or annoyance was impossible to determine. "Isabella, do you remember what happened on the day you stopped living with your daddy?" Prosecutor Walsh asked gently. "We were in a car," Isabella said, her voice becoming quieter as she accessed memories that had been buried under trauma. "There was a loud noise, and then I woke up in a place with white walls and people in white clothes." "What happened after you woke up in the place with white walls?" "The bad lady said that Daddy had died in the car crash and that I couldn't live with him anymore," Isabella said with devastating honesty. "She said I was going to live with new people who would take better care of me than Daddy could." The lie was so cruel, so calculated to destroy Isabella's connection to her father, that several jurors visibly reacted with disgust and anger. "What happened next, Isabella?" "A different lady took me to a house with other kids," Isabella continued. "She said my name was Shakita now, and that I shouldn't talk about Daddy anymore, because it would make me sad." "Did you believe that your daddy had died?" "I didn't want to believe it," Isabella said, her voice breaking slightly. "But grown-ups kept telling me it was true, so I thought it must be true." "Isabella, during the time you lived in different houses, did you ever try to find your daddy?" "I asked about him sometimes," Isabella admitted. "But people said that talking about dead people was unhealthy and that I needed to focus on my new life." Daniel felt tears streaming down his face as he listened to his daughter describe 3 years of being told that her father was dead while he'd been grieving her supposed death just miles away. "Isabella, how did you end up living on the streets?" Prosecutor Walsh asked. "The last house was very bad," Isabella said with the matter-of-fact tone she used for discussing trauma. "The grown-ups there were mean to the kids, and they didn't give us enough food. I got scared and ran away." "How long were you living on the streets?" "A long time," Isabella said. "I learned how to find food and safe places to sleep, and I learned how to ask nice people for help." "Is that how you met your daddy again? By asking for help?" "Yes," Isabella said, looking directly at Daniel with a smile that made the entire courtroom understand the miracle of their reunion. "I was wearing my special necklace, and Daddy recognized it because it belonged to his family." "Can you show us the special necklace?" Isabella lifted the antique locket that had led to her identification, holding it up so the jury could see the intricate rose pattern that had been passed down through 5 generations of Brooks women. "This necklace was supposed to keep me safe," Isabella said with 6-year-old wisdom. "And it did, because it helped Daddy find me." The defense's cross-examination of Isabella was brief and gentle, with Monica's attorney clearly understanding that attacking a traumatized child would only strengthen the prosecution's case. "Isabella, you've been through very difficult experiences," said defense attorney Mark Stevens. "Is it possible that some of your memories might be confused or unclear?" "My memories about the bad lady are very clear," Isabella said firmly. "She told me that Daddy was dead, and she told me that I wasn't Isabella anymore. Those are not confused memories." "Thank you, Isabella," Attorney Stevens said, recognizing that further questioning would only reinforce the child's credibility. Monica's testimony, when she finally took the stand in her own defense, revealed a level of narcissistic selfishness that shocked even observers who'd been following the case closely. "Mrs. Brooks, did you love your daughter Isabella?" Prosecutor Walsh asked during direct examination. "I loved the idea of having a daughter," Monica replied with chilling honesty. "But the reality of motherhood was much more difficult than I'd expected." "In what way?" "Isabella was very demanding," Monica said, as if discussing a problematic employee rather than her own child. "She required constant attention, constant care, constant supervision. She interfered with my social life and my relationship with Daniel." "So you decided to eliminate that interference?" "I decided to find a solution that would benefit everyone involved," Monica said with the same clinical detachment she'd used when planning Isabella's fake death. "Isabella would get parents who actually wanted to raise a child. Daniel would be free from the burden of single parenthood, and I would be able to have the kind of marriage I'd envisioned." "By faking Isabella's death?" "By arranging for Isabella to be placed with a family that was better suited to meet her needs," Monica corrected, still refusing to acknowledge the criminality of her actions. "Mrs. Brooks, do you feel any remorse for the pain you caused Isabella and Daniel?" Monica was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating whether expressing remorse would help or hurt her legal position. "I regret that the situation became so complicated," she said finally. "But I don't regret ensuring that Isabella ended up with parents who actually wanted to raise her. Mrs. Brooks, Isabella ended up homeless and living on the streets. How does that constitute placing her with parents who wanted to raise her?" "The foster care system failed Isabella," Monica said, deflecting responsibility with the ease of someone who'd spent years perfecting her victimization narrative. "That's not my fault. But you created the circumstances that placed Isabella in the foster care system under a false identity, making it impossible for anyone to properly care for her or reconnect her with her biological family. I made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time," Monica said stubbornly. The prosecution's closing argument focused on the calculated cruelty of Monica's actions and the lasting trauma she'd inflicted on both Isabella and Daniel. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a mother who valued her own convenience more than her child's life," Prosecutor Walsh said. "Monica Brooks didn't just abandon her daughter. She systematically destroyed Isabella's identity, her family connections, and her sense of safety in the world. The evidence shows that Monica Brooks conspired with Dr. Patricia Reeves to fake Isabella's death, collect $2 million in life insurance payments, and abandon a 3-year-old child to a system that failed to protect her. For 3 years, Isabella survived neglect, abuse, and homelessness while her mother lived in luxury funded by the tragedy she'd orchestrated. But this case is also about the power of love to survive even the most elaborate deceptions. Daniel Brooks never stopped loving his daughter, and Isabella never stopped hoping that someone would find her and bring her home. The antique locket that led to their reunion proves that some bonds really are stronger than lies, stronger than greed, and stronger than the cruelest betrayals imaginable. The defense's closing argument attempted to portray Monica as a desperate mother who'd made poor choices, but hadn't intended to harm anyone. "My client made mistakes," defense attorney Stevens argued. "But Monica Brooks is not a monster. She's a woman who was overwhelmed by motherhood and made decisions that seemed reasonable at the time, but had consequences she never intended. The prosecution wants you to believe that Monica planned every detail of this conspiracy, but the evidence shows a series of panicked decisions made by someone who was struggling with postpartum depression and an unsupportive marriage. Monica Brooks has already lost her daughter, her marriage, and her reputation. Sending her to prison for decades won't undo the pain that Isabella and Daniel have experienced, and it won't prevent other families from facing similar tragedies. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts against both Monica and Dr. Reeves. Monica was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for insurance fraud, child abandonment, and conspiracy, while Dr. Reeves received 22 years for medical fraud and her role as the architect of Isabella's fake death. "Mrs. Brooks," Judge Chin said during sentencing, "your actions represent a level of selfishness and cruelty that is difficult to comprehend. You not only abandoned your own child, but you systematically destroyed her identity and her connection to the father who loved her. The trauma you inflicted on Isabella will affect her for the rest of her life. Dr. Reeves, as a medical professional, your betrayal of the trust placed in you by patients and families is particularly egregious. You violated your oath to do no harm in the most fundamental way possible, and you used your medical license to enable crimes against a child who deserved protection. However, this case is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to overcome even the most devastating betrayals. Isabella Brooks has shown courage, strength, and wisdom that far exceeds her years, and her reunion with her father proves that some bonds really cannot be broken by lies or cruelty. But for Daniel and Isabella, the legal victory was less important than the personal victory they'd achieved in rebuilding their father-daughter relationship from the foundation of love that had survived 3 years of separation and trauma. "Daddy, are the bad people going away forever?" Isabella asked as they left the courthouse together, surrounded by media attention that had transformed their private tragedy into a public symbol of justice and healing. "For a very long time," Daniel confirmed. "Isabella, Monica, and Dr. Reeves will never be able to hurt you again." "Good," Isabella said with satisfaction. "Now can we go home and make pancakes shaped like animals?" "We can make pancakes shaped like anything you want," Daniel said, understanding that his daughter's request for normalcy was more valuable than any legal victory or media validation. As they drove away from the courthouse that had validated their truth and delivered justice for their suffering, both Daniel and Isabella understood that their real victory wasn't Monica's conviction. It was the family they'd rebuilt from love, truth, and the understanding that some bonds really are stronger than any attempt to destroy them. 2 years after Isabella's miraculous return from the dead, Daniel stood in the backyard of their new house in Westchester County, watching his 8-year-old daughter teach her new little sister how to plant flowers in the memorial garden they'd created to honor the 3 years they'd lost together. The scene was both heartbreaking and beautiful, a celebration of the family they'd rebuilt while acknowledging the time that could never be recovered. "Rosita, you have to be very gentle with the flower roots," Isabella explained patiently to the 4-year-old who joined their family through adoption 6 months earlier. "If you squeeze them too hard, they won't be able to grow properly." Rosita nodded seriously, her small hands carefully holding the seedling that would become part of the garden Isabella had designed to represent their family's journey from loss to healing to hope. "Isabella, why did you choose roses for this part of the garden?" Daniel asked, settling into the chair where he spent his mornings watching his daughters create something beautiful from soil that had once been empty. "Because roses are strong enough to survive winter, but beautiful enough to make people happy in spring," Isabella said with the wisdom that continued to amaze everyone who met her. "Daddy, I wanted our garden to show that families can survive bad things and still grow into something beautiful. Have you ever watched someone transform trauma into purpose, pain into wisdom, loss into the foundation for helping others heal? What does it look like when a child teaches adults about resilience and hope? The past 2 years had been a journey of healing that had transformed all their relationships in ways none of them had anticipated. Isabella had thrived with intensive therapy, patient love, and the security of knowing that her father would never let anyone take her away again. But more remarkably, she'd begun using her experiences to help other children who were navigating similar traumas. "Dr. Kim says I'm ready to start the helper program," Isabella announced, referring to the peer support initiative at the Children's Trauma Center, where she'd been receiving treatment. "I can help other kids who are scared about finding their families. Are you sure you're ready for that responsibility?" Daniel asked gently, knowing that Isabella's desire to help others came from genuine compassion, but wanting to ensure she wasn't taking on emotional burdens that were too heavy for her years. "I'm ready because I know what it feels like to be lost and what it feels like to be found," Isabella said with certainty. "Daddy, some kids think they'll never see their families again. I want to tell them that love is stronger than being lost." The peer support program had become Isabella's passion, and her natural ability to connect with traumatized children had made her one of the most effective young advocates the center had ever worked with. But it was her relationship with Rosita that had shown Daniel the full extent of his daughter's capacity for love and healing. "Tell me again about how Rosita came to live with us," Isabella requested, though she knew the story by heart and had helped make every decision about expanding their family. "Rosita's parents died in a car accident when she was 3, Daniel explained, picking up the narrative that had become part of their family's evening traditions. "She didn't have any other family to take care of her, so she was living in foster care and feeling very sad and scared." "And then what happened?" Isabella prompted, though she'd been instrumental in every part of Rosita's adoption process. "Then we decided that our family had room for one more person who needed love," Daniel continued. "And when we met Rosita, we knew immediately that she belonged with us. Because families aren't just about being born together," Isabella said, reciting the philosophy that had guided their decisions about adoption. "Families are about choosing to love each other every day." "That's exactly right, sweetheart," Daniel confirmed, marveling at how naturally Isabella had embraced her role as a big sister to a child who'd experienced similar trauma, but in different circumstances. The adoption of Rosita had been Isabella's idea, motivated by her understanding that their family's healing had created space for helping another child who needed safety and love. The process had required extensive evaluation, home studies, and legal proceedings, but Isabella's advocacy for her future sister had been the driving force behind every decision. "Daddy, there are lots of kids who need families," Isabella had said during one of their conversations about adoption. "Since we know what it feels like to lose each other, maybe we could help a kid who's lost everyone." "Isabella, adoption is a big responsibility," Daniel had explained. "It means committing to love and care for someone for their entire life, even when things are difficult." "Like you did for me when I was lost?" Isabella had asked. "Exactly like that," Daniel had confirmed, understanding that his daughter's proposal came from a place of wisdom rather than impulse. The integration of Rosita into their family had been surprisingly smooth, partly because Isabella had taken the lead in helping her new sister feel safe and welcomed. But it had also revealed the depth of Isabella's recovery and her ability to use her experiences to help others heal. "Rosita, do you want to see the special box where we keep pictures of people we love who aren't with us anymore?" Isabella asked one evening, several months after Rosita's adoption had been finalized. "What kind of pictures?" Rosita asked with the careful curiosity of a child who'd learned that some topics were safe to explore while others led to pain. pictures of your mama and papa from before the accident," Isabella explained gently. "And pictures of the nice people who took care of you before you came to live with us. I want you to know that loving your new family doesn't mean forgetting your old family." Daniel watched from the doorway as Isabella helped Rosita look through photos and mementos that preserved her connection to the parents she'd lost, understanding that his 8-year-old daughter was providing exactly the kind of therapeutic support that most adults struggled to offer. "Isabella, how did you know that Rosita needed to remember her parents?" Daniel asked later that evening. "Because when I was lost, people kept telling me to forget about you," Isabella explained. "They said remembering would make me sad, but forgetting made me feel empty. I want Rosita to know that she can love her old parents and her new family at the same time." The wisdom Isabella had developed through surviving abandonment and trauma had made her an extraordinary advocate for other children facing similar challenges. Her work with the peer support program had expanded to include speaking at conferences about child welfare reform, and her story had become a catalyst for changes in how the foster care system handled identity preservation for children separated from their families. "Isabella, there are some people who want to meet you," Daniel said during one of their weekend conversations about her advocacy work. "They're working on new laws to make sure kids in foster care don't lose their real names and family connections like you did. Will it help other kids find their families?" Isabella asked with immediate interest. "It could help prevent kids from getting lost in the first place," Daniel explained. "Isabella, your experience has taught people important things about how to protect children's identities even when they can't live with their birth families." "Then I want to help," Isabella said without hesitation. "Daddy, if talking about what happened to me can keep other kids from getting lost, then it's worth remembering the scary parts." The legislation that had been inspired by Isabella's case, nicknamed Isabella's Law by child welfare advocates, required foster care systems to maintain detailed records of children's original identities, family connections, and cultural backgrounds, while implementing safeguards to prevent the kind of bureaucratic anonymity that had allowed Isabella to disappear for 3 years. But for Daniel and Isabella, the most important victory wasn't legislative change or media recognition. It was the family they'd built from the foundation of love that had survived the most elaborate betrayal imaginable. "Daddy, do you think Monica ever thinks about me?" Isabella asked during one of their evening conversations, referring to her biological mother with the same clinical curiosity she brought to all discussions of her traumatic past. "I don't know, sweetheart," Daniel admitted honestly. "What made you think about Monica?" "Dr. Kim says that sometimes people who hurt children were hurt when they were children too," Isabella explained. "I was wondering if Monica was scared and sad when she was little, and if that's why she made bad choices when she grew up." Daniel marveled at his daughter's capacity for empathy, even toward the woman who'd caused her years of suffering. "That's very thoughtful of you to consider," Daniel said carefully. "Isabella, it's possible that Monica had difficult experiences that affected her choices. But even if that's true, it doesn't excuse what she did to you." "I know," Isabella said with certainty. "I'm not saying what Monica did was okay. I'm just wondering if she knows how to be happy now, or if she's still scared and sad." "Why does that matter to you?" "Because being scared and sad makes people do mean things," Isabella said with 8-year-old wisdom. "And I don't want other kids to have mamas who are too scared and sad to take good care of them." The conversation revealed the depth of Isabella's understanding about the cycles of trauma that affected families across generations, and her intuitive grasp of how healing required addressing root causes rather than just punishing symptoms. 3 years after their reunion, Daniel and Isabella established the Isabella Brooks Foundation for Family Preservation, an organization dedicated to preventing family separation through trauma and providing support for children who'd been separated from their biological families through abuse, neglect, or deception. Our foundation helps kids stay with families who love them, and helps kids find new families when their old families can't take care of them, Isabella explained to visitors who came to learn about their work. The most important thing is making sure every kid knows they're loved and that they belong somewhere safe. What's the hardest part of your work? Asked Dr. Sarah Martinez, a researcher studying family resilience and trauma recovery. The hardest part is meeting kids who think they're not worth loving, Isabella said honestly. Sometimes kids who've been hurt by grown-ups think it's their fault, and they don't believe that anyone could really want them. How do you help kids understand that they are worth loving? I tell them my story, Isabella said simply. I tell them that I was lost for 3 years, and my daddy never stopped looking for me. And when he found me, he was so happy he cried. I tell them that if my daddy could love me that much even after I was lost, then there are people who could love them that much too. On the 5th anniversary of Isabella's return from the dead, the Brooks family gathered in their memorial garden to plant a new tree that would grow alongside the flowers they'd been tending together for years. Isabella, now 11 years old, had invited several of the children she'd mentored through the peer support program to join their celebration. This tree is for all the kids who are still looking for their families, Isabella announced to the small group gathered around the sapling. Every year when it grows bigger, we'll remember that love never stops growing, even when families are separated. And every year when we see how much it's grown, we'll remember that healing takes time, but it's always possible, added Rosita, now 7 years old and serving as Isabella's assistant in the Foundation's youth programs. As Daniel watched his daughters plant the tree that would represent hope for countless other families dealing with separation and trauma, he understood that their story wasn't really about the miracle of reunion. It was about the everyday choice to transform pain into purpose, loss into love, and survival into service. The antique locket that had led to Isabella's identification now hung in a place of honor in their Foundation's office, alongside photographs of the dozens of families who'd been reunited through the advocacy and support services that Isabella's experience had inspired. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry about the 3 years I was lost, Isabella said during the Foundation's anniversary celebration. And I tell them that I'm not angry anymore, because those 3 years taught me things that help me help other people. I learned that kids are stronger than grown-ups think, that families can survive anything if they love each other enough, and that being lost doesn't mean being forgotten. Most importantly, she continued, I learned that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to love you every day, no matter what.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.